The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to April's edition of Payroll Question Time. Sorry to keep you waiting there. It was my fault. I've been faffing around with different webcams, keeping you all on hold, but hopefully it means most of you are with us right from the start today. Like every session, today is all about reflecting the dynamic changes that have been impacting the world of payroll, which we know has been really, really busy as many of you have been negotiating year end. Of course, today is going to be focused on topics we hope have been driven predominantly by yourselves. So we've asked you in previous surveys to tell us what you want to talk about, and we're going to be covering some of those topics today. We're going to talk about everything that's impacting the world of payroll. And during the course of that, we're going to be asking this wonderful panel, you can see in front of you, a number of questions which have been preset as we go through the topics, but hopefully questions from you yourselves as well. So if you have a payroll question you would like to ask our panel, please do put it in the chat box. I will ask the panel in real time. No such thing as a bad question or a silly question. In fact, no such thing as a really challenging question either. Put everything in there if you can. This show is all about helping you to run a more efficient and compliant payroll process. So if you have something you're not sure about, put it in the question box and we'll ask it as soon as we can. And in fact, we've already had one coming in, which is absolutely fantastic. We will be running 2 polls today. So that's our opportunity to ask you to get involved, to get your thoughts on what's happening in the world of payroll within your specific payroll department as well. So please do get involved in those. We will also comment on the results. And in fact, one of the polls is a poll we've asked before. So I'll be really intrigued to see if the results and the numbers have since changed. So I won't give you away the results until we've got the new ones, but rest assured that should be a fun exploration and topic of conversation for our panel. We are of course recording this session, so you don't need to be scribbling away with notes. Please remember we were recording it. We'll send you a copy of the recording and the slides after the recording is over. So thank you ever so much for registering for today's show. And there will of course be that very important survey that we send again, which is all about ensuring we deliver a really good session going forward. So there's a particular topic we haven't covered yet. That's your opportunity to let us know what you want us to be talking about in the next episode of PQT. Right, last but by no means least, I'm going to read out a short legal disclaimer which says the presentation does not provide definitive answers to individual queries and in some places takes views on matters which are uncertain. It is not intended to be relied upon in any specific context or as a substitute for seeking advice, legal or otherwise, on a specific circumstance, as each case may be different. Right, let's jump into today's show and introduce you to our wonderful panel. I'm going to start with myself because I'm already here. My name is Nick Day. I'm CEO of JGA Recruitment Group. We're a specialist payroll recruitment provider operating now in both the UK, Europe, and the US. I'm also a Reward 300 member, like many of our panel. And yeah, I've been in the industry for over 20 years. I've seen it change and evolve significantly. And we're going to be talking about a subject I'm really passionate about today as well, which is artificial intelligence and payroll. So I'm really excited to get involved in that as just one of our topics for today. That's enough about me, though. Let me introduce you to our panel. I'm going to run from my left to right. So I'm going to ask Karen Thompson, if you can please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody. As always, it's a delight to be here. So I'm Karen Thompson. As Nick said, I'm very proud to be part of the Reward 300 group. I'm a chartered member of the Chartered Institute of Payroll Professionals. I also sit on a couple of forums. One, I know Simon also sits on EPG, and I sit on HMRC's Admin Burdens Advisory Board with particular focus around the tax burdens on small businesses. And like Nick, we operate globally. So although I'm the UK payroll director, we operate globally and have an office in the USA. Thank you.
Fantastic. And moving from my left to right, Simon Parsons.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you. I have the Master of Science in Payroll Management. I'm a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Payroll Professionals, along with most of the people here, part of Reward 300, which we have been even back to the days, I think is at that side, when it used to be the payroll top 50. I think that was the second year that trophy relates to. And I chair the British Computer Society Payroll Specialist Group, an organisation called IRENE, sit on the HMRC EPG, and also, as was just Karen and Richard, and also on the rep body group of HMRC as well.
Absolutely fantastic. Too many awards, Simon. That's your problem. It's hard to know which one you're pointing at. I'm very excited to welcome back Richard George to today's show. Couldn't make the last one, but back with us today. Richard, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, good afternoon. Richard George, Director of Education at the Payroll Centre. So we are the UK's largest training company in the industry. Like my colleague, like my colleagues, figured it's the wrong way around. I sit on a number of panels, Reward 300, and I was a Reward 50 as well, Simon. I think we were way back when. And obviously we have a lot of input due to the quantity of payrollers we have the pleasure of meeting annually.
Fantastic. And last but by no means least, our resident payroll pensions expert, Andy Nichols.
Hi everyone. Yes, I obviously work for the pensions regulator, where my role there is to help the payroll industry comply with the drawers of all the pension things that have been given to payroll to facilitate automatic enrolment, etc. Yeah, my background's payroll and been a regulator 10 years. So yes, I enjoy pensions as well.
Or just as well, because you win the competition today, Andy, for the first question posted in the box, which is directly related to you. It's addressed to you, in fact, and it's about pensions. So we'll get to that in just a moment. Thank you for the question, Sybil. Right, let's jump into today's topics then. We're going to be talking about AI considerations, artificial intelligence, concerns and advice for the increasingly automated road ahead. Should be a really interesting topic. We're also going to talk about payroll data, which pretty much links to AI anyway, but changes to what is being collected, mandation and potential risks, umbrella companies and compliance, accrual, rolled up holiday pay discussed. This is something we're seeing an awful lot of conversation about in the social forums for those that are active on social platforms, a pensions update from Andy as well, and the latest from the SD Worx Academy, who are offering a number of fantastic courses and resources. So we'll talk through those as well. And of course, if there's a chance at the end, we'll go through some hot topics and Q&As if people are still with us and have any questions at that point unanswered. So let's jump in then to our first topic for today. For the questions that are coming to my questions box, please be patient. I will come to those in just a moment, but there's a section I think is probably going to be a good time for me to ask that question. So I'll get to that shortly, but keep them coming in. So first topic, AI. How will it impact our industry? What can it be used for in payroll? How can we use it to, or can we use it to rewrite official documentation? But is it still accurate? How does it compare to robotic process automation, or is it one and the same thing? We'll try and get some distinctions in there. And how can we integrate it with payroll software and other considerations for implementation as well? This could be an entire webinar on its own. We could probably talk about this for 90 minutes all by ourselves. But so we're going to try and keep it concise and brief. I'm going to come to Karen first, because you have a global operation. You're working as a payroll director. I'm sure AI is infiltrating every part of your process. Tell us about your experience with AI so far and how it's impacting your daily workflows.
Well, I love it, so I'm probably going to be a divisive part of the audience. But considering, I was brought up in an era where you didn't even have internet, so for something I'm very much with that, and I do remember the little dial-up. But with AI, so in addition, I know that payroll software and you're looking at robotics, which is different with AI. But what I've found really, really useful, and please note this is not an advert for any particular thing, as I'm sure Nick you would say, but I've been playing with this chat GPT, and where I found it really useful, because you've gotten to hear about documentation, and now I will put the caveat, you do have to be careful, of course you do, it doesn't replace the human. But I was doing some interviews and I thought, oh, I've got to put these interview questions together, and I basically asked it, provide me some interview questions for a management position in professional services. And I just watched and stared in disbelief as all this information came through in seconds. Now, did I have to top and tail it? Did I have to take up what I didn't want? Yes, I did. But if you think of the time I might have spent trying to put those together, thinking about what I wanted to ask, and then in seconds it was done. So I do think AI has got its place in the fact that I'm still the human being that was going to be asking those questions. I'm still the human being that would be taking answers to those questions, but it just saved me probably 30 minutes of my time by having the template. I wanted to do a business case for a particular thing that I wanted at work. So I asked it to produce me a template based on some criteria, and I was amazed with what it came up with. So I think with AI, for those perhaps that at the moment sitting on the fence, you know, even just using something as simple as that, play with it, see what you do. But I say big caveat, you know, you do have to sense check it, you do have to read it. Please don't send something out without doing that. And the other thing to remember is it is searching the World Wide Web, which means it's taking data that has been put into the World Wide Web. I know that's an old-fashioned term probably now. But yes, I think there's going to be much more to come in this space, Nick, much more to come, that we can use it just to save us some valuable time.
And it's worth caveating as well to understand that if using GPT, and there are lots of platforms out there now, you know, Gemini, Cloud, and others as well. But all the data typically goes up to September 21, certainly on GPT. So again, if you're trying to get latest payroll data, although you can link it with intelligent plugins to update the web so it is up to date. But if you're new to this, you're going to be restricted to its original format. If you get more knowledgeable with these kind of language programs and generative programs, then you can actually make them more real time in terms of information that's been published. But there are a few plugins and things required to make sure that happens. So that's worth being aware. But a really good use case there for sure, Karen. How about yourself, Simon? How are you seeing AI? I mean, you're obviously working for a software provider that I'm sure are fully immersed in this space as well. It'd be interesting to get your take.
Yeah, certainly something we're actively looking into and playing around with at the moment. We do have some elements of thought to think about as you go through. Karen's mentioned ChatGPT. It's just remember you are making information available if you're providing it with data, whereas some of the others, such as Copilot, don't. So you're not necessarily publicly making available. But if you're wanting to search around the world for information, it's a great place to be. If you're wanting to actually have AI deal with your data, just be aware of what you're using, because you'll make your data available to everyone. So there are some that will be private and some that will make it public, and it's just knowing that distinction. I mean, there's an element of you could say to the fear factor of will AI help or not. In the payroll sector, you think what a great way that you're almost at a point where you don't actually have to think about people's data when they're coming on as a new client so much. You can just give it the data and it will figure it out for you, so that you do those sorts of translation activity from one solution to another potentially. And it's just knowing how you can actually apply that, how you can deal with constant process, how you can check for fraud. So it will look out for certain fraud activity in relation to payroll data, how you can deal with post-process reporting and intelligence. So there's great potentials with AI in the payroll sphere. Sometimes I think the problem with these things, Nick, is it's a bit like getting a bit of new tech. You get it home from, I don't know, Currys out the box, and you think, what am I going to do? This television has 1,000 features on it that I can use. Isn't that brilliant? And then you look at it 2 years later and think I've only actually switched it on and changed channels. So there is an element of thinking of what the practical use of AI is for you and where you feel it could be of benefit. But there are some caveats there, and I think we all potentially experience an element of AI in relation to our homes now, because we've got these little listening devices. I think I've now got 5 of them around the home, that there's probably even one listening in to me right in this room, taking all this information, that actually we think sometimes it's there to help us, and sometimes it's not actually. It's there to sell you the stock that they've actually got, and it's going to come up with the reasons why you need what they have, because that's not going to sell you something it doesn't have. So there's an element of understanding the control of bias and the algorithms, human intervention, covering the parameters. Is it going off-piste? So is it now sort of introducing information which is actually a little bit wrong. So sometimes when you do some of these to go out into the web and ask them, well, what's the latest on holiday pay law, you may find it will bring in practices that were actually outlawed or not appropriate just because there are articles that go back over years. So there
or
is
even
an
from
element
another country as well, I should add,
or for
because it
another
doesn't
country.
always know how to distinguish, right? So it could be a UK author, such as yourself, Simon, commenting on, a holiday pay in the US, and because you're a UK author, will assume that's correct for the UK legislation.
Exactly. So there are caveats around it to think, just be careful of its control. However, this is sort of the area I'm going to say Richard's got experience in, of having great useful activity and a basis for dealing with I don't want to call it the mundane, because actually we probably find some of these aspects interesting to us, but there's an element of why are we as a panel of 5 here on this call, Nick? We could have AI doing a payroll question time, couldn't we?
Well, yeah, to a certain degree you could. I'm going to summarize some of the points there, because I think they're important. You mentioned a couple of things about AI. AI is going to have an increasing role in payroll. We know that, but it is important that we do manage things like bias, privacy, security. These are all very real concerns. You're going to end up getting results from other people's content online, which is going to have other people's biases involved in that content. And actually, some of the research says that even if you're getting a job description, as Karen has mentioned, yes, it can save us lots of time in terms of creating it ourselves, but actually the research says it takes us 75% more time to review and rewrite work created by AI than it does work we've created by a human. Of course, you could argue the other way around, but it's taken, it's been 100% quicker creating that content in the first place. But there are some considerations, and certainly there can be a vortex that we can lose hours and hours of time to for very little result if we get tempted by the shiny things and different searches. I wanted to add as well, there is has been an introduction, which I'm sure Richard's familiar with as well, of the world's first comprehensive legal framework which regulates AI. That's something that EY have been doing a lot of posting about online in the US. So that's going to change the game a little bit if people want to foster more trust with clients. But I'm going to come to Richard, because if we use it smartly, there's a huge opportunity here to adapt and evolve real-time data for really positive use cases to make payroll an analytical powerhouse, really, if we use it correctly. So Richard, tell us a bit about your experience.
Yeah, I think so. And I was going to sort of address the third item as well while I was on, actually. So one of the key things that we have found, not so much now, was really understanding what they were. So AI and RPA are often sort of looped into one little bag, and they're completely different things. Just really to reiterate, obviously, artificial intelligence, usually we look at it as a large language model. It is a far more comprehensive and complicated solution to bring in, because of the need for it to have a much wider, I guess, girth of understanding for the intelligence to work. And the example is we used it to answer payroll questions. We gave it, as Simon said, you've got to be very careful, but we gave it access to areas of Gov, Google, ACAS, and various other solutions that therefore we gave it the option to look at, I guess, a far more holistic answer. But then you still have to work on it, because number one, excuse the dog, number one, it doesn't understand language as we do. So my favorite all the way through was always PAYE. As soon as you put PAYE in, it's payee. And obviously you can't work with that kind of thing. But what we also have here is robotic process automation. And that is a completely different animal. What we're looking at here is a rule-based static process that you give it. So you tell RPA what you want to do, how it needs to be done, and when it needs to be done by, and it just does the job. So it's often a lot cheaper, a lot quicker, far easier to implement, and we see a lot more of that currently. And you mentioned the word mundane earlier, but it could be those repetitive, mundane, standard jobs that can just go under RPA and get fulfilled. Remember, it doesn't need coffee breaks, it doesn't go to the toilet, it doesn't go home at the end of the day. It understands language, so it doesn't matter what language it's in, but also on top of that, it doesn't have big sausage fingers. So on those grounds, RPA can be a really quick and easy way of managing and automating a lot of solution. where AI is a very different answer, because AI is looking to improve. And, you know, we talked about ChatGPT, but any form of chat, you're seeing it every
Sure.
day. Whatever website you go on, the little box comes in the corner, it says its name is Ian, and basically tries to help you. Well, that's great. And some will and some won't, and some will frustrate you beyond belief. But in 2 years' time, if you go on the same one, it'll be probably 10 times better, because in that period of time, it's learnt and it's improved what it can do in that time. And that's really the whole value there. And really, just as a subset to that, what we saw when we were sort of asking it to answer 2,500 questions, which is what we did, by the end, it was getting them far better than it was at the start. Because by answering 2,500, by the time it got to the end, it got into its groove. And so you see very quickly significant improvement.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well made. I think it's important that organizations understand they need to balance automation with human experience, with human contextualization and human expertise, right? Because we know payroll now is more immersed in the world of employee experience than it's ever been. And it's easy to get this wrong. And funnily enough, I didn't call it out live. And if any of you've seen this post, you may know the one I'm referring to. But I saw a post go out on LinkedIn, I think it was a week or two ago, about an individual trying to do a good thing. I think, you know, the reasons behind it were good, but they created a case study for other payroll managers to use and say, hey, here, I've done this on GPT. Here's a case study for you to go and take to your senior CHRO to show why payroll needs more investment and how to basically wrote the business plan for other people to use. And it did it all from GPT. But actually, if you looked at the nuance of the information, things like Richard mentioned, the language was poor. You can spot AI language sometimes a mile off. There are certain things in recruitment, it's top tier talent. If any of you get a message that says top tier talent, I can tell you that person has not written it. It's come from AI. So certain things you'll be able to identify in the world of payroll. And you mentioned PAYE being a challenge. But what I thought was interesting and what I saw on LinkedIn is it's a very quick way to get out, in my opinion, relatively substandard content. So there's a risk there involved if we're trying to enhance the payroll profession and we're trying to raise the profile. But more importantly, if we're creating that business case and giving it to a CHRO who's savvy with AI, they'll take one look at it and go, well, why would I give any more investment if you're not willing to put the investment in yourself to create a proper business case for why you need more investment? If you're going to use AI to write it and not bother to change the language and make it bespoke to you and give me a cookie cutter response, actually, you've done yourself a disservice in payroll, because you're using AI to do your job for you, and the AI doesn't understand your role like you do. And I would argue, if I saw that kind of report as a CHRO from my payroll manager, I'd be going, well, if you're not going to put the time in to create this yourself, I'm not going to give you the investment. So I think there's a balance to be had. It can really help give you the frameworks, but I still think the human contextualization piece is absolutely important to make it bespoke to you, to use your language, your bias, if you have it, or the way that you see the world rather than the way that AI does. So I think be mindful if you're seeing a lot of payroll content which is being produced at a rapid pace at the moment on all social platforms in particular. Be mindful of what you're reading. Be mindful that just because someone else has done it and it looks great because you've not used it before, actually there might be a lot of errors in some of that information. So I think that human piece that Rich was talking about as well, and Simon with the bias, is also really, really important to take into consideration. Interestingly, last point for myself here really is I'm hosting a seminar at the Payroll Congress in Nashville, which is all about AI. The title is Revolutionizing Payroll Management as AI's Role in Shaping the Future of the Industry. So we've got panel members from EY, Deloitte, KPMG, Grant Thornton, senior partners who are all fully immersed in this world. But interestingly, nearly all the conversation within those firms at the moment is around analytics. How can we use AI to really, make the analytics the powerhouse of payroll? And I think there's a lot of value to be had on the strategic side. I think it was, everyone saw, if you saw another LinkedIn post where someone said, I spent all my career in payroll learning VLOOKUPs and now AI does it for me. It's not necessarily that simple, but it can fast track your analytical abilities within payroll. So I think it's probably worth having a look at some of the use cases from that scenario. I don't know if Karen, if you've been able to utilize AI in some of the analytics that you're producing for your clients?
So we're certainly experimenting with it. So some bits with more robotics, to be fair, taking information and having bots move it from one place to another and doing it without us interfering with it. From the AI perspective, taking on all board the points, that everybody's made, I do think it's in its early stages. That's why you were saying there, business case, you have to top and tail it. You have to make it your own. Don't get me wrong. For me, it gave me a framework, as you quite rightly put it. So I think I think we'll all be experimenting with it as we go, because if we can use it in the right way, it's not going to be suitable for everything, as you say, but if we can use it in the right way, things like as Richard's used it, you see the chat bots coming up all the time, and you know, don't you, that it's a chat bot that's answering your question for you. You do just know. And they will get better, but we certainly are looking at it, absolutely, because, well, we'd be silly not to, as any, I think all of us are looking at what we can and where we can use it for the better. It has to be an improvement, not just because it exists.
Absolutely right. Anything you'd add, Simon? I'm going to come to you, Richard, in a minute with a question regarding implementation. I'll see if Simon's got anything to add.
Not especially, Nick. I think all the points made are really good. I think we're going to see this technology advance and advance, aren't we? The other aspect is, I mean, one of the areas of the advantages of AI is actually, we say, in spotting fraud. The problem is we'll probably get to a point where AI is very good at creating fraud. So, and convincing the AI watching it that it's legitimate. So there's an element of we're getting into those sorts of dark areas at times, maybe, but I think there's a lot of advantage we can gain on the simple things of thinking, I can ask a simple question, give it a whole load of data, and it will go find it for me and get me the answer. And I've got a straightforward question, well, not a complex question, where I just don't know where to go and look, it will give me an answer.
Yeah, fantastic. And Richard, from your perspective, considerations for clients that may want to be looking to implement a kind of AI-based solution, what are some of the considerations you might want to highlight for those clients?
There's a couple here, and I think it falls into two camps. It's number one is your own. So are you implementing RPA or AI internally, which is probably easier because of the control, but exactly where that sits. But I think the biggest area is really your providers. So obviously we've got Karen here from AAB, you've got Simon here from Ceridian, SD Worx. Oh, blimey. Sorry, Simon.
We're going out live, Richard. We can't edit that. We can't edit that.
No, I used to work there, so I'm allowed to be a little bit historic. So, your providers are using it. And how much knowledge and transparency do you have around that as well? So, where is your data going? Are the solutions being used by providers in-house, or are they using third parties that could be in other countries? So both internally and externally, what is the journey of your data, which I think is absolutely key. Remember, in payroll especially, we are dealing with secure, sensitive data. Put your GDPR head back on for a moment, which we all sort of left 2 years ago, and it was about data ownership and that sensitive data. Have you asked your provider what they're using? Because I think it's absolutely critical when it comes to what's been implemented by them. But then also, if you're implementing yourself, as I said, in-house, lots of control. External provision is exactly where's your data going, where's it being held. Simon very rightly said, if you're going out onto the World Wide Web, then your data's coming along for the trip. So it's absolutely key that you have that control throughout the process. But I think when it comes to implementation, it starts small. And where we see a lot of accounting firms, especially, some real focus, and Karen mentioned it as well, is RPA first. So it's quicker, it's easier. You see far bigger gains far more quickly. Because remember, it's not taking our jobs away, it's giving us time to do our job. Remember, with payroll 20 years ago, we were doing a gross to net calculation, really, once a month. Maybe you got a week to mess about with it and then put it through again. Now you have to be a pensions advisor, a tax advisor, you need to be a benefits expert, a reward expert. The list goes on. And with the escalation of payroll within business and where it now sits, you're looking at forecasting, budgeting, and having that seat, which you often say, Nick, at the higher table. So where do we find the time to do that? And it's about using things, I guess, effectively.
Yeah, I think you highlight a really good point as well, Richard. If you're using a firm to support you in this implementation, ask them what they do to ensure data privacy, security, and ethical use. I think that's really important across all of your payroll processes. And it is really smart. So interestingly, if you're using it for RPA purposes and robotics, if there is a problem in your chain somewhere, maybe you're using Zapier or something similar as your integration or media, your medium tool, middleware tool, actually AI can find where the problems are. So for example, if you're running a website, you can put a sitemap through AI and tell me where are the problems in my website sitemap, and it'll come back not with just the error codes, but then you can ask it how to fix the error codes. So it can work really, really quickly to find out where there may be problems in your chain of automations that you've created. So I think that can be a use case where you save a lot of money, because we know if we export that to consultancy firms, it can be very, very expensive. And even if you still need to use a consultancy firm to rectify it, going in knowing where the problem is in the first instance can still save you many consulting hours. So I think there's some use cases there, but we still need the expertise behind it to run it. And before we move on to the next part of the first poll actually in relation to AI, I'm going to come to Andy, because how are you seeing AI being implemented or utilized in the world of pensions at the moment? Is this something we need to be considering as well? And have you seen any positive use cases?
I've not seen it. I do know the pensions industry is definitely looking into it. So the pension firms, a bit like we were saying earlier, the providers are looking to see how they can utilize automatic artificial intelligence to answer queries and maybe even modeling of pension stuff. So watch this space. I think all industries across the globe, aren't there, are looking to see how AI can benefit their organizations. And I'm sure, not that I know, but I'm sure someone in TPR is also looking at it. And we will also, a little risk perspective,
For sure. Well, a little tip for anyone, because AI is, if using the generative tools, all about good prompting. I've had a question come in here from Emma that says, what lessons can we learn from ASDA's recent high-profile payroll blunder? Well, something I'll mention here is, if we're not sure something's working correctly, and you get an inquiry or something isn't right, you can use AI to try and find out where the error exists, or even just a sense check. But if you're doing prompting, make sure you tell the AI tool in the first instance how you want it to act. We tend to go to things like GPT or Cloud, whatever it is platform we're using, and just say, write me a job description. But you'll find the results are different. Karen, I don't know if you tried this, but if you start it with act as a UK payroll manager operating for a leading firm of global chartered accountants who has an employee base of X, Y, and Z, now write me a job description. Actually, the results will be a lot better. So similarly, even in the ASDA case, I'm sure there would have been opportunities in the process where they could have asked AI if things were running as it should be, and just using it as a sense check piece. I mean, that's one example from a very simple language learning sort of platform or generative platform example. But is there anything else, any use cases here that you guys can consider in the way that you're seeing AI being utilized that perhaps could have prevented the ASDA situation? Maybe I'll come to you for that, Richard.
No, I think people are. So I think it's a bit like Karen's stage. When it comes to AI, it is at such an early stage in our industry. And I'd like to think, sadly, that payroll is probably a little bit behind, just because of it is so humanly integrated. So I think there's a lot of businesses that are contemplating how it can assist rather than it's assisting. Obviously, a lot of the larger providers have integration already, but I think it's more awareness is now at a point where people are considering how it can assist, but probably also piggyback that onto the risk that, for instance, Simon said, it's only as good as what you tell it initially, and then it's down to AI to make the decision itself. So I think if you ask this question in a year's time, it would be a very different answer. Because I think, as I said, most employers are looking at keep it simple, stupid at the moment, which is RPA, rather than AI integration, where a company like mine sees a very different angle because it's not dealing with the same sort of data, where it's about time. And that's really the key for us, not how good the answer is, for instance, because I can give as good, if not a better answer than AI to a question in our ACT solution, but I haven't got time to do 2,500 of them. So I think, people have a very different aspect now as to what AI will be. But going back to Simon's view, I think where the value will be is that audit, that control, that focus on fraud, where we can see real key change without key impact on the team.
Yeah, and don't be too tempted by all these wonderful bells and whistles solutions. I'm sure all of you on the panel, if not everyone listening and watching, is being inundated by. I got pitched a recruitment product recently where an AI avatar was being sold to us, or attempted to be sold to us, to say, hey, this AI avatar can answer all of your first round candidate questions. If anyone wants looking for a job, we can respond. Number one, it goes completely against our values, because I don't want an AI avatar speaking about real people's careers and livelihoods and wages and things. I think that goes completely against what we're trying to achieve. But number two, when you look behind the scenes, it was a terrible, terrible product. And I just think that sometimes we see an avatar and think this is way ahead of where it used to be 10 years ago. This is amazing, and actually forget that its use case in that example, certainly for us, was completely redundant. But it's sometimes very easy to be led down the way of a bells and whistle graph or table or robotic process that actually, when you look under the hood, you don't need, and they end up being very expensive, and we can make those mistakes. I'm sure everyone's being pitched very heavily at the moment because people are seeing an opportunity in AI and they're trying to take advantage. So keep your wits about you, I would say. Anything anyone else would like to add before I open up the poll? Or are we good to go with poll, guys?
No, I think, as you said, there's a lot out there. If I had a pound for every time my CEO comes to me and says, can we see value in this one? Can we see value in that one? Because he's into IT more than he's into payroll. Yeah.
Can I just add as well?
I need AI to manage my AI.
That can be done. Another conversation. Karen, sorry, of course you can.
I was literally, rather than a direct example, obviously government departments will be looking at this as well as everybody else. And it's just really, again, just to warn, we were saying about fraud, but also the scammers. They too will be looking to do this and make something look even more real. Just yesterday, there was the big alert from HMRC to do with the VAT and a QR code that had gone out. At the end of the day, it's just, again, I think all good things about it, and I'm excited about where it might go, but also just be aware the not so nice people will also be doing this. And I think it puts us as consumers, individuals, potentially at risk as well. So it's just to be mindful of that.
It's a great point, and not to scare the panel here because we're all on audio, but if there was a scammer listening to this and taking copies of our audio as we speak, you're very easily able to turn that audio into any script you like. And I could create that audio and contact someone in your payroll department as Karen Thompson with my script with your voice and say, please change X, Y, and Z. And there are cases of ransom attacks now, certainly in the US, with people, scammers calling parents of children and saying, we've kidnapped your child. This is the voice. And it is their child's voice saying, mummy help, daddy help. And they look in the front room and their kid's eating breakfast. They haven't got them, but they find the child that's not there at the time, and it's very worrying. And it's pay us the money, don't tell anyone. So these things are very real considerations, not wanting to scare everybody, but at the same time, we do need to keep our wits about us. And from a payroll perspective, it's going to be a function that's going to be targeted, right? As certainly you're going to have employees phoning you, Karen, potentially saying, can you change my bank details? You know the voice, you know the employee. You may need an additional point of verification beyond the voice. And I think that's worth bearing in mind as we go forward. Hey, I'm not willing to scare everybody here, but if we can protect just one business from that kind of fraud, then hopefully we're doing our job. Listen, let's jump into the first.
Right, we're going to this when the screen's red, so we all look evil.
Yeah. Well, they're just recording your voice now, Richard. So don't worry, mate. You'll see it.
Fair enough.
Right, first poll. This is the one we've actually run before. The question is, will you be implementing RPA and AI processes in your payroll operations? Options, yes, we already are, possibly, but no solid plans, or no, we are avoiding it right now. If everyone can please, got over 100 of you get involved in that poll, that'd be fantastic, because I want to compare these results with the results we had last time. Now, while we're waiting for those to come in, we've had a few questions come into our questions box, which is really, really good. Please keep them coming. I'm going to run through a couple of these with our panel while waiting for those results. The first one is, Andy, the one for you. I have a query on the legal obligations of the employer when the employee reaches the age of 75. I know they are no longer required to be in the auto-enrollment scheme, but my question is, does the employer legally have to remove them in the pay period of their 75th birthday, or should they inform the employee before removing them from the scheme?
I would say both. I'd have to refresh my memory, but obviously, when is payday, and is it before the 75th birthday? Speak to the pension scheme. But the pension scheme hopefully have already notified one another around, the employee's already aware of it. Speak to the employee, communicate, explain what's going on. 75 is the limit, so need to. It's all down to communication. But my understanding, but I'd have to check, maybe using AI, is up to 75. So if pay days before 75, you can process that final pension, but afterwards you shouldn't.
Okay, super. Next question comes in from Monica. It says, one of our employees sadly passed away during the previous tax year. Sorry to hear that, Monica. During the time at the company, they were receiving some taxable and reportable benefits in kind. How do we process this via P11D? Do they get reported normally, or is there anything we need to keep in mind when processing? Perhaps I'll come to you, Karen, if that's okay.
So, sorry, so can I just recap that? So you've got somebody who's died, they've got a benefit in kind, and I take it you're not payrolling. So P11D, then I would still report the benefit up to the point at which they died. So that's what I would do. And obviously it's you're going into the tax realms here. So, but that's what I would expect to do. I don't know if Simon's got a view on that.
Yeah, I think that's right. So you would send it to the estate, to the executors of the deceased person to deal with, but you would continue to report.
Okay, and last question for now before we get the poll results. It's a random question that comes in from Jackie. It says, why do the HMRC not have an email address? Sometimes I am on hold forever. I'm not sure they've ever used AI. We've actually talked about this a few times on previous episodes of PQT. Simon, I'll come to you. I know you've got hidden contacts in the HMRC. I'm not asking you to give them away, but how would you deal with being constantly held on hold? And is there an email address that we can use, or what's the best way to get hold of HMRC?
Well, there are a couple of routes you can get hold of HMRC. So you'll find they've got Facebook contact and then on Twitter as well. So you can actually message and chat box with them as well. However, you may find they're limited, so they won't know who you are, or they can only give general advice and can't deal with specific cases. But I think Nick, I've got my own sources of contacts that potentially you have to escalate to. However, even with those, their starting point is, have you tried the proper channels? So I only ever use those if we have started the proper channels, but sometimes it can be a little bit of a frustration. But are they using AI? I think in some ways they probably are, but maybe not in the ways we'd hope.
Yeah, no, interesting. Okay, fantastic. Any more questions? Put them in the box. We'll get through to the next round in the next poll, which is coming up shortly. But let's see where we are with these poll results. So to remind those in audio only, the question is, will you be implementing RPA and AI processes in your payroll operations? The answers are yes, which is 7%, possibly, but no solid plans yet, 45%, and 49% said no, we are avoiding it right now. So let's see how that compares to last time. Well, last time we ran this poll, yes is up now by 5%. It was 2.7% last time. We're up again on the possibly. Last time we ran this poll, it was at 40%, so a 5% uplift there. And the avoiding it right now last time we ran this was at 57%. So that's dropped down by 8% as well. So pretty much a 5% shift across each category here. Be interested to get the panel's thoughts. Maybe I'll come to you first, Richard.
Yeah, I think it probably says what I said before we finished the session on it, that payroll is close, but it's at that point at the moment where it's in investigative mode in a lot of organizations rather than delivery. So I think that probably sounds just about right where you are, to be honest with you, Nick. Yeah,
I probably agree. Anyone else like to add to anything on the panel? Any observations generally across those results, Simon or Karen?
Well, I think Nick, there's an element of how serious is payroll taken within an organisation still. I think it's certainly increased its profile, but is the art of the possible understood as it's a great base of data for a business to find and analyse what they're doing and why. And there may be an element of some of the decision makers above may not see it as a potential route that benefits the business. Still, I think we're still at that mindset of some get it, but most it's not their major consideration for their business.
Yeah, no, I was going to add as well. I was going to say with RPA in particular, which I think most people could look at their process and say, oh, a bot, but you have to bear in mind there's a cost to a bot. And, you know, with a business case, it's a case of, whilst it would potentially make our lives easier, is that enough for the business to invest in it? And then that comes back to then Simon's point of, is there enough emphasis placed on efficiency savings within the payroll process itself? Probably more so for a bureau, perhaps, than an in-house employer.
Sure, makes sense. Well, if people are interested in this subject of AI, I will add a little plug here, but I did release a payroll podcast on this on the 12th of April with an interview with Anne Reever-Wangen, who the subject is, will AI replace payroll jobs in 2024? But actually, she gives us some really good use cases of where she's been utilizing it and implementing it in her business. She's very, very skilled. She's qualified in AI. She's AI certified as well. So really interesting conversation had there. It lasts about an hour. So if you are interested in taking a deeper dive into this subject, I'll put a link in the chat notes in just a moment, and you can follow along to see if that's something that you want to implement or know more about. You can do so. Right, let's jump into our next section of the show then. We're going to be talking about payroll data. What is strictly payroll, self-employment, director info on dividends and what is needed, technical consultation on postcodes. Well, you can read the slide if you're watching it there, and rather than me go through it, let me come to Simon to give us a bit of an overview, if you will.
Yeah, I'll cover off some of these elements, but you're seeing these things creep out with quite tight deadlines. So just to make you aware, there is extra data that HMRC are proposing needs to be captured and reported on the FPS or via other means from April 2025. The slight difficulty there, I guess, for us as a software developer community, if I speak from that angle, but equally it'll affect the payroll service people as well, is the specifications of what that actually is have not actually been revealed. So at the moment, we're seeing some draft legislation, some consultation, views, asking questions, but no detail of exactly what it is. We can guess. So the two aspects I think that impact payroll predominantly or primarily are the requirement for hours for work time from April 2025, or selection of, I'm going to say from memory, it might be less, but 10 reasons why you can't provide it. Which is easy to do because all you've got to do is select it from a drop down, apparently. That's sort of how it's described. So there's an element of how are you going to do that and what are they talking about? But the one that came out within the past 2 weeks is for anybody operating in an investment zone or a free port. You'll need to place the postcode of work into data. And we saw this earlier in a cycle of consultation. And then it seemed to get dropped because they were wanting that for everybody. So you'd actually have to put the postcode of where everyone works. That'd been interesting when you work at 20 locations in a day. But to now saying that you now need to put the Freeport or investment postcode in. Apart from there can be exemptions to actually having to work 60% of your time if you're disabled or other reasons. So interesting aspect, that's in consultation right now, but again with a deadline or an implementation intention of April 25. And then there are other stuffs in relation to self-employment and directors, dividends, etc. on other returns that are coming in. But just to make you aware, these things are creeping in. They will affect payroll collection of something that traditionally you won't have collected or even needed to collect because it actually has nothing to do with payroll calculation or payment to individuals, but the HMRC are going to require the employer to provide that data to them.
Fantastic. Karen, anything you'd like to add, particularly in relation to the 13th month? Well, I can see you smiling as well as Simon was going through and nodding along.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, it is. So, I mean, again, keeping it all professional and everything else, of course, all above board. There is a huge amount of debate going on at the moment, not just with the payroll industry, but actually with the accountancy professional bodies as well, to do with the first part of hours, and in particular, so hours as far as variable hours go, you know, we're since 2019, we've had to record the number of hours and at what rate of pay. So in theory, again, it puts pressure on the software developers, of course. The fields are there, as in we're processing that in payroll, put that on an FPS, then take the contractual. And there's quite a lot of debate going around definitions, because of course hours worked are different to hours paid. So as a contractual, you know, 40 hours a week, just because you are contracted 40 hours does not mean that you work 40 hours a week. You know, for various reasons. So I think that is something that still needs to be ironed out. And then it's a case of, if you do take hours worked of 40 hours a week, well, in a month where you're working on working days, so the 260 for apportionment, you know, there's 22 days, there's 21 days. So my hours are going to vary over those days, assuming I'm actually working on those days. So there's quite a bit of debate there. So it's a watch this space. And as Simon says, it's pretty hard for software to put something in when we don't actually know what's going to do. And then the drop down, and this is the real bone of contention. And it's where, so if you've got somebody who, let's take a basic payroll, salaried, 40 hours a week, what have you, and then there's some maternity pay in it, or there's some sick pay in it. Now, we don't actually have to record SSP anymore. I know we sort of do for compliance, but we don't as far as the payroll goes. As far as we tend to, but we don't have to. And then there's sort of office holders. There's also, we don't record job titles usually in payroll. It might be in the HR, but it's not usually in payroll. So there's a very deep misunderstanding with what employers might hold somewhere, and I use the word might, versus, well, it's very easy to report on it. It isn't if it's the payroll, because we don't have that information. So that's the, I'll stop there on the hours. From the free ports, what's interesting is when they first did all this, as we know, there was a national insurance category. We did wonder which letter they might find. We thought we might be going around the alphabet again when they come into this. But with that, and then now they want the postcodes, and there's a 4-week consultation. So it's pretty much a foregone conclusion, I would argue. But interesting, in the original consultation to do with these hours, where the payroll industry did say, no, we don't record this, but obviously HMRC maybe missed that point. But with the investment zone, it was location of employers. And they actually came back and said they understood the burden on employers to collect that data and report it would be too great. And yet they're going to do this. My concern is, if we do it for free ports, are we then going to creep? Now, you can understand from a management of the tax system, because it's national insurance, them wanting to do some form of compliance, as in, you know, checking that somebody's on the free port category of NI and their postcode matches an investment zone, for example. But there's absolutely no argument at all for the management of the tax system or tax codes when it comes to knowing somebody's hours. And the previous banding that we had, that we still operate, you could argue should be gone, because that was for working tax credits, which no longer exist. So what's the, you know, can HMRC legally hold and use that information, would be another question that needs to be asked. Onto mandation of payrolling, that's payrolling of benefits. It's still at this time on track for 2026, as in, I say on track, HMRC's view plans. There is disappointment and around of, you know, how will we treat accommodation? How will we treat loans? Will we end up having to do something as we do now and fudging things? And this is where this month 13 comes in of, you know, are we going to have a month 13 to mop up for the year? I'm not quite sure how that's simplification. I can see that being, if I put my ABAB hat on, I can see that being very much of an admin burden on the employer. So, yeah, but at the moment, nothing's moved, which means we're in a state of flux of, will HMRC listen? Will HMRC change things to make them even compromise? I think we're at watch this space, but do keep this on your radar, because it will just suddenly be announced, I am sure.
Well, we'll certainly do our best here at PQT to keep everyone reminded of their obligations. No questions in on this, which surprised me actually. So if you have any questions, do remember to put them in the questions box. We'll get through to those in the next poll. If we're covered here, unless you've got anything to add, Richard or Andy, we'll move into the next section on umbrella companies. Anything you'd like to add, or should we move forward?
Nothing to add.
Nope.
I think it's just what I was just going to say, Nick, as Karen quite rightly said, we're at a bit of a point where we're waiting. There was the worry and the concern that obviously the hours was for national minimum wage. Well, as far as we were told, it absolutely isn't, which is a good thing, because obviously once you start getting into the intricacies of correct hours to correct pay, it becomes totally unworkable. But I think also Karen and Simon and myself sat on a panel about a month ago on the mandating of payroll. And I think we've given them enough to think about, that we're not going to hear from them until the end of the summer. Get 28 people in the industry in front of HMRC, and it makes it a little bit more complicated.
Do any of you have the link? So Sybil just mentioned, can you share the link to the other listeners for the consultation on the postcode data and ask everyone to apply to it? We need to get our voices heard. So Karen, if you can send that to me, I'll share that with everyone in the group if we've got access to it. Right, let's jump into umbrella companies. And also thank you, Sybil, for making that request. We'll show the power of our community in one foul swoop in just a moment, which would be great. So umbrella companies, latest announcement in the agent update, mandating due diligence, compliant or not. I know, Simon, you keep your ear to the ground very closely when it comes to umbrella companies, those that work brilliantly and those unscrupulous ones that get mentioned as well, but we've got some announcement changes. So I wondered if you could give us an overview.
Well, basically, in Nigel Huddleston, in the announcements made, I think it was last week, actually, last Thursday or Wednesday, that the code of conduct for umbrellas will be announced soon. And the consultation hasn't been launched on that, and the detail hasn't been given. However, the increasing list of tax avoidance promoters that are published seem to be heavily weighed with umbrella companies, and so they're seen as quite a serious risk for HMRC. They're not saying that all of them are non-compliant with PAYE rules, but a number of them seem to be promoting tax avoidance, and so there's an element of diligence and care. Plus, there's a lot of people who are being employed on a basis through an umbrella company where they maybe appear to be being exploited in some sort of way, as the employer costs that would normally be covered by the engager seem to be foisted against a deduction on the pay rate to the individual, so even at levy. And certainly secondary NI liabilities, and they're now paying for their own holidays, sickness and other rights. So I think there's some nervousness in the space of the operation of umbrellas, which have become increasingly popular, and controlling them in some way to return the balance back to some sort of fairness to the individual, but also to other employers who actually do engage employees and pay the right wages, etc. But so I think it's an element of this has been progressing. The interesting aspect is when the launch of the further third consultation on the tax advice market was presented, which I'm thinking is probably about a month ago, umbrellas were out of scope of that consultation. So they are treating the umbrella market entirely separate. The oddity about a lot of the umbrella organisations is they operate in what we might consider to be public sector employment. Not always. Agencies are very heavy, but a lot of it can be in public sector, NHS areas and things like that, which is strange for what we see as being pseudo-government bodies, that they would operate in that way, but all in an endeavour, I'd imagine, to save on costs.
Excellent. Anything you'd like to add to that, Richard, or I'll come to you? I'll come to you first, Richard.
It's not my area, I'll be totally honest.
That's fine. Or Karen? If not, we'll jump into holiday pay, which is always a popular topic on the show.
I was just going to reiterate what Simon said, and of course it is one of those areas. HMRC in particular has been very uncomfortable with it for years, and it is because it's a unique set of circumstances that does this, and I think the risk is it's down to the individuals who don't even realise that they are being exploited, and I think that's where the unfairness for me comes in. But there will also be some genuine good companies, and I think it's important to say that they're not all bad.
Absolutely right. We work with some fantastic ones here, obviously.
As well, Nick, pension does apply.
Yeah.
The umbrella companies, the employees, the people who are, doing the work, the pension does apply. And of course, if it is along the lines of the £1,000 invoice fee is what's being processed and paid, all the costs employers pension will all be coming out of that fee, as well as the processing fee for an umbrella company to process the payroll for that individual. So yeah, so we're aware of them and we want to make sure they're doing it right. So we do link in with HMRC on that.
And thank you to whichever listener it was that suggested we talked about this on today's show in our survey, because you've successfully managed to find Richard's kryptonite at the same time, which I found quite enjoyable. But I'm going to go back into Richard's wheelhouse now. We're going to move on to the world of holiday pay. So let's jump into the next slide. Accruals and rolled up. We want to find out who's considering which option. Holiday pay bleeding over into employment law. How does it fit in? And is this more of an HR consideration? So Richard, I wonder if you could take the floor for us.
See, I don't use umbrellas. I wear a coat with a hood, and that's why I don't really get involved. So, when it comes to roll up, it is a significant transition from where we were. Obviously, for years it's all been unlawful. But if I had £1 for the queries that we get on our helpline around that demographic, in which you'd consider irregular, where it is so complicated and so difficult to actually calculate holiday pay for them, on the grounds that A, they're so irregular they probably don't go on holiday, B, it's physically impossible to find 52 paid weeks. So there is enormous value in the option. I think where people have got a bit confused is it will have to be a real-time solution, and it has to be done per pay period on actual earnings received. So you're putting a model in there straight away where it is a more complex or a required process. But funnily enough, the other query we're getting a lot of is the display of it. So it is a separate pay item. So it has to be classified as rolled up holiday pay on the pay slip. And so we probably have more queries on that than anything else, which is really weird. But employers will be considering it purely on the group of probably more irregular than part year. But obviously the part year got integrated more because of the actual modelling of entitlement. But the solution is there to assist and will obviously alleviate what could be a fairly painful process for a lot of employers. So I'm all for it. I think it's a good option, as long as it's held to the right group, obviously, where nobody else has changed.
Right, Simon, what are your thoughts? Anything you'd like to add?
I go on all day about this subject, Nick, and it's probably one of the ones that do specialise in our academy as well. So if you want to hear more about holiday, please do. But certainly we see a lot of social questions recently on the holiday pay question. That's constant. But the question this week that came up is the person was due in today, they've gone on sickness. What do we have to do about rolled up holiday? Well, it doesn't matter whether they were due in or not. If they're sick or on statutory parental leave, they have a right to rolled up holiday pay. So if I'm not due to work, it's a good idea to go down the doctors and get a sick note filled out, because you'll have to pay it. So there are considerations there. The other aspect is it's actually not really a simplification. It's been described as a simplification. The rolled up holiday pay itself is simple, but covering the sickness and the statutory parental leave isn't, because it involves a 52-week averaging of rolled up holiday pay, and you still have to pay it on top of the ordinary pay. And I'm not sure if people have really understood that. There's lots of queries where people are saying, oh, we've implemented this from April. Did your holiday year start in April? Otherwise, you're not allowed to until the next holiday year start. It's an interesting time, and the same principle with accrual. The other aspect I guess people have caught out is they're thinking that this was the same as it used to be, and it's not, because you know, I've certainly experienced it even with my children. When they're on accrual basis, they only got an accrual of basic hours, and actually the accrual basis is all hours, including extra hours. The other aspects of rolled up holiday pay is it doesn't count towards national minimum wage. It's treated entirely separately. Salary sacrifice won't reduce it first. That will reduce minimum wage pay. Deductions will come off minimum wage pay, etc. It doesn't come off the rolled up holiday pay because that's holiday pay in addition and extra to anything of normality. So there's an element of being very careful with it in its application. But welcome for the casuals to a certain extent, welcome for the irregular. Part year is misunderstood. So this isn't someone you give a job to for part of the year. This is for someone you don't pay for part of a year, but they're still employed with you. So if you employ them for 6 months and they work for 6 months, they're not a part year worker. The intention is where you employ them for a year, but you only pay them for 9 months or 10 months. There has to be at least 1 week under the contract where they're not paid. The other aspect of the new law, which I guess people haven't still quite fathomed, is it involves everything. So there is no EU 4-week aspect. It's across the lot. This applies. So it's all hours for accrual and all pay for rolled up. Even the extra allowances that you might pay on occasion are part of that rolled up holiday pay, whereas traditionally lots of people were just basing it on basic or contract, and that doesn't apply to accrual and rolled up holiday. It's everything.
Sounds like we've got a pretty comprehensive overview from both Richard and Simon. If there's anything left out there, Karen, anything you'd like to add before we move into our next poll?
Well, I was just going to cover the thorny bit of is it payroll or is it HR? And I think it is both. It is both. From as far as the payment of it, it is. And with what Simon and Richard just shared, as far as, you know, there is a definition of what earnings must be included. And what have you. So that in itself is a case of here it is, this is what you must do. When you're not looking at this new legislation and you're looking at the other legislation that applies to everybody else who's not irregular hours or part year workers, that's when the challenges start to come in of what should I include. So we know about the bonus cases, the commission cases and the overtime cases. And I think that's the important bit. They are cases, they are case law, employment law, not payroll law, employment law. So then to ask it's up to the employer to decide what they might do. Now, if you talk to different employment lawyers, some will err on the side of caution and say, cover everything. Even if it's just a one-off, cover everything. Others will look at it maybe more pragmatically, that will say, well, actually cover what you do regularly. So if you pay regular bonuses or regular this, you might want to include that. When should I pay it? Can I do it just once a year? Another common question. Again, this is down to the employer. I mean, I feel really lucky at AOB because we've got an HR function, AOB people. So if it's not payroll, I've got somewhere to send it. So I feel really, really lucky. But I think for those who don't have that, and it's coming into payroll, I think where it's a decision, what should we or shouldn't we say to employees will be included, surely is contractual, and therefore in policy, or whether it sits with HR, the payment of it not. With this new piece, whilst, as Simon said, it is not a simplification in most parts, but the definition of what needs to be included as a pay component is laid out. And I think that's where I'll leave that one.
Well, let's jump to our next poll then. Let's get everyone, 100 plus attendees joining us today, involved again in poll number 2. We are, of course, operating this show today on the 24th of April. So how has your new tax year kicked off? Good, we're on top. Some issues here and there, but okay. Or it's been a nightmare. Let us know what your thoughts are on how you're getting on. Of course, some of you are going to be in the middle of that at the moment. Actually, funnily enough, today, not as many questions coming through as we'd usually get. So I don't know if that's a demonstration of just how thorough our panel have been in answering the slides as we've gone through today. I thought it was a particularly thorough response to holiday pay that you've left everyone with no questions. But if there is anything there that you haven't asked yet, that you're struggling within your payroll department, now is a great opportunity to put it in a questions box and we can ask our panel. As 101 of you, I'm sure one of you will have a payroll question that is just not quite sure if you need to ask. Put it in the chat box, we'll ask it. I can do it anonymously if you like, so just put that in the question as well. No one needs to know who it's from, but I will use it to challenge our panel, so keep them coming through if you can. Right, let's have a look at some of these results. I'm going to come to, who should we come to for this one? I'm going to come to you, Karen, to analyse the results once they come through if you can. We've got 61% say good, we are on top. Some issues here and there, but okay, that's 30%. And 9% say it's been a nightmare. What are your views on those there, Karen?
I'm not really surprised by them. I mean, some issues here and there, you know, you're experiencing some tax codes not quite coming through properly, or employee details not being up to date, and incorrect tax codes, or say incorrect the tax codes employees don't agree with. But good on top. It's good to see, considering we had the national insurance change. But again, great thanks to all our software providers who will have pulled out all the stops to get that through. Given, you know, they would have had to have delayed our start of year software updates. But yes, so it's really encouraging to see that 60% we're on top. It's good to see. If you think back to the old days of the P14s and what have you, it's much better now.
Yeah, I'd agree. Great results. And actually, Jessica's put an agreement. I managed to get the P60s out at the same time as the April pay slips. Next up, as we all know, P11.
Well done.
Of course, not everyone does P11Ds, but for the managers that do, always used to be the most complicated form in payroll. Is that still the case, Karen? Is it still that one you dread most of all? Is that been superseded?
I mean, I suppose when you say dread, I mean, it depends on what benefits and kind you've got. You know, if you've got the basic medical and what have you, and it could just be the volume is actually your biggest bugbear rather than doing it itself. And if you've not got software to do it and you've got a lot of them, oh dear, I feel for you, because there are limits on what you can put through with HMRC's tools. But if if you've got complexities where you've got to figure out what it is, then obviously you're bringing in the tax advisors then, so you may have a third party that you use on retainer or otherwise for that tax advice. So I think it will depend on the type of scheme, you know, what benefits you've got in place and how many of them.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, listen, let's talk about the SD Worx Academy then. For those that want to get upskilled on the relation to income tax, national insurance, starters and leavers, student loans, payments and more, the SD Worx Academy could be the place you need to go. There are a number of courses coming up. There is a link to the schedule, which I'll put in the chat as well, in case you can't access it from the slide, where you can go to a calendar of these events. But we've got the 14th of May, UK Payroll Part 1, Income Tax and National Insurance. On the 15th of May, SD Worx are hosting one called UK Payroll Part 2, Starters and Leavers, Student Loans and Statutory Payments. 17th of May, Directors National Insurance. 24th of May, Salary Sacrifice, what is it and why? And of course, there's a calendar there as well. While I put the calendar link in the chat, Simon, I wonder if you could just give us a bit of an overview of what people may expect in those Academy courses, who's hosting them, and why people should attend.
Yeah, sure. So the UK Payroll 1 and 2 will be is undertaken by someone familiar to a number of us on the panel. That's Judy Northover, who's a chartered member of the CIPP. She's also a CIPP tutor, as well as I think she probably does some work for yourselves, even, Richard. But she's
she's a bit of a gypsy.
Yes, so she's coming in delivering the SD Worx payroll training, which is starting out for those that are new into the industry or just want to brush up. The Director's National Insurance is a bit more of an expert webinar that's undertaken by myself and my legal colleagues, as well as the salary sacrifice, what is it and why. And so there's a series here for those that are starting out and those that really wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of some really technical areas. In fact, we're running one tomorrow morning on national minimum wage for a number of clients. If anybody wants to join that, you're welcome to join as well. I think there's still places available. These are a means of gaining education with an SD Worx twist to it for those that are users, but they're not just for SD Worx. They can be for any client usage elsewhere as well. But feel free. It's something we started around this time last year and are building up in their popularity.
Fabulous. And you'll see a link now in the chat if people want to book into that call Simon just mentioned, which is still places on. Go to the calendar, you can book on directly there as well. Right, we're going to jump in just a moment to Andy's specialist subject of pensions, latest updates and considerations. Before we do, we've had a question come in from Stephanie that says, we're really struggling with HMRC allocating payments correctly, even though we're using the references they're providing. I think we've had this question before. You're not alone, Stephanie, you're not alone. Are there any top tips you can share, as we're currently running at over 2 million overdue, where the vast majority of that value has simply not been allocated? Due to the size and value involved, Simon's nodding. Come to you, Simon, if I may, for that question.
Yeah, sure. It's fairly common, Nick. HMRC will say there's only a small percentage of employers impacted by this. They may even quote about 2%, but 2% of 2.26 million is actually quite high. So there are, and most of those you'll probably find are slightly larger than the SMEs, the 1.4 million small employers. Even some of those will have struggle. Unfortunately, it's something quite often my team see and help people with, and it's an uncomfortable experience. So have empathy there. Sometimes the HMRC people try and persuade you to not raise a charge resolution case, in which case you're going to get debt chasers come to you every 28 days. You need to raise the charge resolution case, really, and that stops things, and it actually gets the team. Sometimes they put it off on, well, we've got a backlist of 18 months. Well, if you don't join that backlist, you'll never get to the front, is a reality. So you may find that's not very helpful, but we have had a few specialists that can pin these sorts of things down with the contact, but they are dependent on HMRC cooperation. Without them cooperating, there's very little you can do. They only HMRC can resolve for you, but there's an element of insist on charge resolution case, chat with them and get it resolved, and let them not put you off having that charge resolution, and you'll find it's dealt with eventually, and it stops interest, penalties, and some of the chasing. You may not see that on your online account that it stops it, but it does, and see where we go. But I'm sure Karen's got similar experience, and Richard as well, in this sort of market, but you're not alone, unfortunately. It's one of the regular topics we raise at EPG. So we all three sit on the employer payroll group of HMRC, and I think it's even one of the items we've asked to be on the next meeting agenda, is to have the debt management banking people along to explain what's going on and what they're going to do about it. Some of the contents of those meetings is confidential. I think on a broad subject, I can say it's something that is known of. The other challenge sometimes we have when we make contact with HMRC things is sometimes we can feel like it's just us and no one else is having the problem. Well, let me assure you they are, and you're not alone.
The 18-month backlog.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
it reminds you
eventually will get done.
Yeah, it reminds me of the saying that, I don't know where it comes from, but they say the best time to plant a tree was 25 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today. So get yourself onto that list, as you say. Even if it takes 18 months, you won't get seen until you put yourself on it. Richard, I'll come to you for another question that's come in from Sally that says, we are having issues with HMRC, another one. We are submitting P46 card changes, which aren't being actioned for months. When employers contact HMRC, they deny receiving the information, even though we've received online acknowledgements. I don't know if this is one of the same issue. I'm not too sure, but Richard, I don't know if you can give us some guidance here, or maybe back to Simon.
I think it's fairly generic at the moment. Yeah. I will give you another example. A very good friend of mine has a high earning benefit adjustment for child support. They've done their returns. HMRC have said they haven't. They've got confirmation electronically that they've done it, but they just keep getting letters saying they're being fined 100 quid. I'd love to say it's specific around the P46 car form, but I'd say it's probably more just generic. I think, Simon, you'd probably agree with me.
Yeah, I would. Yes. Yeah, this month's topic is something else, so the helplines are dealing with that. We'll leave this one for 6 months.
But what's the best thing to do though if they're denying they've received it? I mean, what should be the call? If you've got evidence, do you just wait it out? Or what action should this individual be taking?
Well, it's you know, I think it's the concern will always be that you'll keep getting letters saying you owe them X. And this takes us back to Simon's point that you've got to, you know, you've got to show that you've tried, and you've got to have proof that you've tried, whether that's the escalation process, whether it's the confirmation electronically that you've written back to them, whatever it may be. I think the worst thing to do is to not do anything, obviously, but principally, if you have gone through the right process and you have proof and usually response, then it's either escalation or fighting, I guess, against the right. But it seems to be very, very common currently. Things are just not up to speed.
Yeah, it's a
I was
bit
going to say as well,
frustrating that they put the burden of proof on the professionals raising the issues rather than having a better sort of system for acknowledging the complaints in the first place. Sorry, Karen, you're about to say.
I was just going to say, if you're payrolling of benefits, it's not so good because obviously we have to report the change of car through the payroll and the FPS, so the P46 is redundant effectively. But another option that somebody might try, and it's put it on the individual, is to use the person. I was going to say to phone HMRC and do this. I wouldn't recommend that. As of yesterday, they have a 1 hour 40 minutes waiting time, but is to look at your personal tax account, and there is a facility. I've not had to use it myself, but there is a facility where you can report benefits and expenses. So it might be worth the individual registering, if they don't have one, a personal tax account going on there, a bit like you can say you've got my salary wrong, which they seem to do frequently, where they, you know, their estimated earnings, you can actually go in and tell them what benefits you've got. So that might be an option in the short term as well.
Yeah, I have just.
I was just going to say, Nick, on the back of that, using the personal tax account is a quick way. So I will give you another example of me. They used smart coding, got it all wrong. I got paid a large percentage of my income in 1 month because of history. They added it on. They felt I was over 6 figures. They sent me a new coding. I go on the personal tax account and tell them what I am going to get, and literally 24 hours later, and it's sorted. So it is most definitely the easiest, painless part.
Yeah. And Sally came back to say, thank you, panel. It's good to know it's not just us. The trouble is our employees believe HMRC and not us. So what I've suggested is wait for this to come out on the Payroll podcast. You can get the audio copy of the discussion we've just had and send that to your employees if that helps. Obviously, I'll try and get it out a little bit quicker for those that need that sooner rather than later. Of course, you get a copy of the slides and things on this as well after the show. Right, Andy, he's been waiting very patiently to my right as I look at you. Tell us the latest updates and considerations in relation to pensions, net pay arrangements, and what to do when it's wrong.
Well, update-wise, there's not much of an update, as in the Pensions Minister, Paul Maynard, mentioned at the weekend about 2017 review, i.e. the changes where the lowest threshold will go down to 0 and the automatic enrolment age will reduce from 22 down to 18. DWP have confirmed that those changes will still be enacted sometime in the mid-2020s. 25, 26, 27, presumably that sort of time frame in terms of years, and that there will be a consultation. The consultation will occur, and it will be done at the right time in the right way, is how DWP phrased it. So just keep an eye out for this consultation, because that will explain the timing possibilities for the change to the lowest threshold to 0 and the reduction in the automatic enrolment age to 18. So keep an eye out for that. I'm sure it'd be something we'd mention on the on our next PQT, or maybe the following PQT, or maybe the following PQT. Not sure when the consultation will come out. Just keep an eye out. Other things that are going on in the background, obviously the pension pot for life. That's still being looked at, but it's in very, very early days, and obviously there's quite a lot of implications for employers on payroll if you have 1,000 employees and 1,000 pension schemes. So that's still no more news on that. The reason why we put net pay arrangement, what to do if you're doing it wrong, really we're talking about there's only two types of tax relief for pension schemes: relief at source and net pay arrangement. And if you get it wrong, you're either going to be under deducting contributions, so you're not paying enough pension contributions, the individual isn't, or the person's got double tax relief. And you just need to find out, make sure that if your pension scheme operates net pay arrangement, that on the payroll system you're doing net pay arrangement. That's when you take the tax calculation is done after the pension has been deducted is net pay arrangement. Think of it that way. And the relief at source is where you're reducing the full contribution by 20% basic rate tax amount. So the amount you deduct from individuals is 80% of the full contribution. So Nest, for instance, relief at source, Now pensions, smart pensions, a net pay arrangement. The people's pension can be either default to relief at source if you ask them for a pension scheme. Group personal pension schemes always relief at source. So just check to make sure you're doing it right. And if you got it, if you know it's wrong, speak to your pension provider. They will help you. And HMRC will definitely get involved with double tax relief. And if it's more than one tax year, and probably good to tell us as a pension regulator it's wrong, and then we'll try and help resolve it. But most of the work will be done between you as the employer and the pension scheme.
Fantastic. And no, that's great. Just like you said, if there is anything that people watching or been tuning in today would like us to cover off next time, either pop it into the chat or do look out for the survey that will follow this show. That's your opportunity to let us know. So, today we've covered pensions, SD Worx Academy, AI. We've talked about umbrella companies, payroll data, holiday pay, whatever it is that you'd really like us to discuss, let us know and we'll make sure we feature that in a future episode. So that's your opportunity to make sure we're talking about the topics that you really want us to be navigating on your behalf or challenging or getting our thought leadership expertise on. So do let us know what that is. And we're right on time, I think, here. So it just leaves me to say a huge thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today on Payroll Question Time. The next show will be on the 23rd of May. So please do get registered when you can. It'll be opening soon. There's a link in the chat, so I've just popped in. And please do share this with all of your payroll colleagues and friends and anyone else you come across in the world of payroll as well, because anyone that registers will get a copy of the slides. And we really want to help raise the profile of payroll, make sure there's more compliant payroll operations, more people that really understand the complexities of payroll, and they can do that by joining this show. So please do share the love, and hopefully we'll see you all next time. Just leaves me to say one final huge thank you to Karen Thompson, Simon Parsons, Richard George, Andy Nichols. My name is Nick Day, and we'll look forward to bringing you the next episode on the 23rd of May. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend.
Bye all. Bye.